The ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine is one of the most deeply rooted and complex struggles in modern history. While it is often portrayed as a political and territorial dispute, the true origins of this enmity stretch far back into the ancient past. Deeply embedded in the pages of the Bible, the tensions between these two peoples go beyond just current-day issues. They have been shaped by millennia of history, tracing back to the very promises made to Abraham, the father of both Israel and Palestine. In the Bible, the story of Israel and Palestine begins with Abraham, whose sons, Isaac and Ishmael, became the fathers of two nations that would ultimately come into conflict. Isaac's descendants would form the nation of Israel, while Ishmael's descendants would eventually be recognized as the ancestors of the Arabs, including the Palestinians. From this moment on, the Bible offers a prophetic and historical lens through which to understand the dynamics between these two peoples, a struggle that has continued for centuries. This script will take you on a journey through the Bible, starting with the origins of the conflict between Isaac and Ishmael, moving through Israel's rise as a nation, and tracing the ongoing struggles over the promised land. We will explore how the Israelites' battles with the Philistines laid the groundwork for later tensions, and how prophecies in the Bible shape the modern-day conflict. As we examine these ancient texts, we will gain insight into why Israel and Palestine remain locked in such deep enmity today, and how their future is foretold in the Scriptures. The story of Israel and Palestine begins with the patriarch Abraham, a central figure in the Bible, and the covenant God made with him. Abraham was promised by God that he would be the father of many nations, as seen in Genesis 17:4-5. As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham. For a father of many nations have I made thee. From this promise came two sons, each of whom became the father of distinct peoples, and the origins of the Israel-Palestine enmity can be traced to them. Abraham's first son, Ishmael, was born to Hagar, Sarah's maidservant, as a result of Sarah's impatience with God's promise to give Abraham a son. In Genesis 16:1-2, Sarah suggested to Abraham that he have a child with Hagar, because she was unable to conceive. Ishmael was born, but this decision led to tension between Sarah and Hagar. Later, God's promise was fulfilled when Sarah gave birth to Isaac, the son through whom God's covenant would be carried forward. In Genesis 21:9-10, Sarah saw Ishmael mocking Isaac, and this led to the famous conflict between the two sons, resulting in Sarah demanding that Hagar and Ishmael be sent away. God reassured Abraham in Genesis 21:12-13, telling him that while Isaac would be the child of the covenant, Ishmael would also become a great nation, and also of the son of the bondwoman will I make a nation, because he is thy seed. Isaac, the son of promise, would become the father of Israel. God changed his name to Israel in Genesis 32-28, after wrestling with him, establishing him as the father of a nation that would eventually inherit the land God had promised to Abraham. Isaac's descendants, the Israelites, were chosen by God to be his special people, a holy nation tasked with fulfilling his purpose in the world. This was the beginning of Israel's identity as the chosen people of God. Meanwhile, Ishmael's descendants would also grow into a mighty people, often identified in the Bible as the Arabs. In Genesis 16-12, God gives a glimpse of Ishmael's future when he says, "And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren." This prophecy marks the beginning of the ongoing tensions between the descendants of Isaac, Israel, and the descendants of Ishmael, the Arabs, including the modern Palestinians. The relationship between these two peoples would be marked by struggle, conflict, and enmity, as God had foretold. The ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine is one of the most deeply rooted and complex struggles in modern history. While it is often portrayed as a political and territorial dispute, the true origins of this enmity stretch far back into the ancient past. Deeply embedded in the pages of the Bible, the tensions between these two peoples go beyond just current-day issues. They have been shaped by millennia of history, tracing back to the very promises made to Abraham, the father of both Israel and Palestine. In the Bible, the story of Israel and Palestine begins with Abraham, whose sons, Isaac and Ishmael, became the fathers of two nations that would ultimately come into conflict. Isaac's descendants would form the nation of Israel, while Ishmael's descendants would eventually be recognized as the ancestors of the Arabs, including the Palestinians. From this moment on, the Bible offers a prophetic and historical lens through which to understand the dynamics between these two peoples, a struggle that has continued for centuries. This script will take you on a journey through the Bible, starting with the origins of the conflict between Isaac and Ishmael, moving through Israel's rise as a nation, and tracing the ongoing struggles over the promised land. We will explore how the Israelites' battles with the Philistines laid the groundwork for later tensions, and how prophecies in the Bible shape the modern-day conflict. As we examine these ancient texts, we will gain insight into why Israel and Palestine remain locked in such deep enmity today, and how their future is foretold in the Scriptures. The story of Israel and Palestine begins with the patriarch Abraham, a central figure in the Bible, and the covenant God made with him. Abraham was promised by God that he would be the father of many nations, as seen in Genesis 17:4-5. As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham. For a father of many nations have I made thee. From this promise came two sons, each of whom became the father of distinct peoples, and the origins of the Israel-Palestine enmity can be traced to them. Abraham's first son, Ishmael, was born to Hagar, Sarah's maidservant, as a result of Sarah's impatience with God's promise to give Abraham a son. In Genesis 16:1-2, Sarah suggested to Abraham that he have a child with Hagar, because she was unable to conceive. Ishmael was born, but this decision led to tension between Sarah and Hagar. Later, God's promise was fulfilled when Sarah gave birth to Isaac, the son through whom God's covenant would be carried forward. In Genesis 21:9-10, Sarah saw Ishmael mocking Isaac, and this led to the famous conflict between the two sons, resulting in Sarah demanding that Hagar and Ishmael be sent away. God reassured Abraham in Genesis 21:12-13, telling him that while Isaac would be the child of the covenant, Ishmael would also become a great nation, and also of the son of the bondwoman will I make a nation, because he is thy seed. Isaac, the son of promise, would become the father of Israel. God changed his name to Israel in Genesis 32-28, after wrestling with him, establishing him as the father of a nation that would eventually inherit the land God had promised to Abraham. Isaac's descendants, the Israelites, were chosen by God to be his special people, a holy nation tasked with fulfilling his purpose in the world. This was the beginning of Israel's identity as the chosen people of God. Meanwhile, Ishmael's descendants would also grow into a mighty people, often identified in the Bible as the Arabs. In Genesis 16-12, God gives a glimpse of Ishmael's future when he says, "And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren." This prophecy marks the beginning of the ongoing tensions between the descendants of Isaac, Israel, and the descendants of Ishmael, the Arabs, including the modern Palestinians. The relationship between these two peoples would be marked by struggle, conflict, and enmity, as God had foretold. The division between Isaac and Ishmael has lasting consequences. As the Bible unfolds, the descendants of Isaac, the Israelites, claim the promised land, while the descendants of Ishmael, through his descendants and later the Arab nations, would also lay claim to the same land. This historical division forms the foundation of the territorial disputes that would later be seen in the conflict between Israel and Palestine. The competition for the land of Canaan first promised to Abraham's descendants, and then fought over by his descendants, remains at the heart of the Israel-Palestine conflict today. While God's promises to both Isaac and Ishmael were clear, the nature of their descendants' relationship with each other has always been fraught with tension. The Bible paints a picture of two great nations, both descended from Abraham, but with different destinies. Israel, as the chosen people, would receive God's law and covenant, while Ishmael's descendants would be, as the Bible describes, a wild and restless people at odds with the nations around them, including Israel. Though the Israelites were initially successful in claiming the promised land, the conquest was never fully completed. Throughout the monarchy, Israel faced continuous threats from surrounding nations. However, the Israelites' struggle for control of the land intensified even further after the kingdom split into two: the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. As a result, Israel's unity was weakened, and various empires, including the Assyrians and Babylonians, conquered and exiled parts of the Israelites. The tensions over the land of Canaan are central to understanding the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians in modern times. The territory that the Israelites struggled to possess thousands of years ago is the very land that Palestinians now claim as their own. The ancient struggles for the land of Canaan set the stage for the contemporary territorial disputes that have defined the Israel-Palestine conflict. Though many centuries have passed, the ancient disputes over land, boundaries, and ownership still resonate in the modern era. The Bible makes it clear that the land of Canaan was promised to the descendants of Isaac, but the complexities of the ancient conflicts involving Edomites, Moabites, and Philistines, among others, reveal the deep-rooted tensions that have existed for millennia. These ancient conflicts laid the foundation for the modern-day rivalry between the Jews and Palestinians, with both peoples holding claims to the same land, each considering it their rightful inheritance. The promises made to Abraham regarding the land of Canaan would become a focal point of tension between the descendants of Isaac, the Israelites, and the descendants of Ishmael, the Arabs, including the Palestinians. In Genesis 12-7, God tells Abraham, "Unto thy seed will I give this land," referring to the land of Canaan. This promise, passed down through Isaac, became the foundation of Israel's claim to the land. Yet the possession of this land by Israel has always been a point of contention, particularly with the descendants of Ishmael, who, as mentioned earlier, were not part of the covenant, but were still promised their own inheritance of land by God. When Israel's descendants, the Israelites, were eventually freed from slavery in Egypt, their journey to the promised land would be filled with struggles, battles, and conflicts with other nations inhabiting the region. The book of Exodus recounts their journey from Egypt, and by the time they reached Canaan, The land was already occupied by the Canaanites, Philistines, and other nations. God commanded the Israelites to conquer the land, which they did after a series of battles, most notably the Battle of Jericho. Joshua 1-3-4 affirms God's promise. Every place that the sole of your foot shall tread upon, that have I given unto you, as I said unto Moses, from the wilderness in this Lebanon, even unto the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and unto the great sea toward the going down of the sun shall be your coast. However, Israel's conquest of the land did not come without resistance. The Philistines, among others, were fierce enemies of Israel, and their territory often overlapped with what the Israelites considered to be their rightful land. The Philistines were descendants of Noah's son Ham, and their land along the coastal regions of Canaan made them one of Israel's most formidable rivals. Throughout the period of the Judges, Israel faced constant hostility from the Philistines, which culminated in the famous story of David and Goliath, 1 Samuel 17. This battle marked the defeat of one of Israel's most persistent enemies. But the struggle for the land was not confined to just the Israelites and the Philistines. Israel's neighbors, including Moab, Ammon, and Edom, nations that were often descended from Lot and Esau, also claimed parts of the land. Throughout the years, Israel's borders were constantly under threat from these surrounding nations. One particularly significant challenge came from the Edomites, descendants of Esau, the brother of Jacob, Israel. Esau's descendants had long-standing enmity with the Israelites, and their hostility toward Israel is reflected in the Bible in passages such as Obadiah 1:10-15. Though the Israelites were initially successful in claiming the promised land, the conquest was never fully completed. Throughout the monarchy, Israel faced continuous threats from surrounding nations. However, the Israelites' struggle for control of the land intensified even further after the kingdom split into two: the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. As a result, Israel's unity was weakened, and various empires, including the Assyrians and Babylonians, conquered and exiled parts of the Israelites. The tensions over the land of Canaan are central to understanding the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians in modern times. The territory that the Israelites struggled to possess thousands of years ago is the very land that Palestinians now claim as their own. The ancient struggles for the land of Canaan set the stage for the contemporary territorial disputes that have defined the Israel-Palestine conflict. Though many centuries have passed, the ancient disputes over land, boundaries, and ownership still resonate in the modern era. The Bible makes it clear that the land of Canaan was promised to the descendants of Isaac, but the complexities of the ancient conflicts involving Edomites, Moabites, and Philistines, among others, reveal the deep-rooted tensions that have existed for millennia. These ancient conflicts laid the foundation for the modern-day rivalry between the Jews and Palestinians, with both peoples holding claims to the same land, each considering it their rightful inheritance. The rivalry between Israel and the Philistines is one of the most prominent and enduring conflicts in the Bible. The Philistines, who settled along the coastal areas of Canaan, were a significant force that consistently challenged Israel's territorial claims and sovereignty. The Bible depicts the Philistines as a fierce and technologically advanced people, often clashing with the Israelites over the land promised to Abraham's descendants. Their presence in the region during the time of the Judges and the early monarchy is crucial to understanding the conflict that would unfold between these two nations. The struggle between Israel and the Philistines began long before the rise of the monarchy. During the time of the Judges, the Israelites were repeatedly oppressed by the Philistines. The book of Judges recounts how the Philistines dominated Israel, leading to periods of servitude and oppression. One notable period of Philistine oppression occurred during the time of Samson, a judge who was empowered by God to deliver Israel from the hands of the Philistines. In Judges 13 1-5, we learn that Israel was in the hand of the Philistines for 40 years, and God raised up Samson to deliver them. His exploits against the Philistines, culminating in his final act of destroying their temple, Judges 16:30, symbolize Israel's ongoing struggle for independence and control over the land. The most famous and defining battle between Israel and the Philistines is this confrontation between David and Goliath, as described in 1 Samuel 17. At this point in Israel's history, the Philistines had gathered their armies to fight against Israel, and a giant warrior named Goliath stood as a champion for the Philistines. Israel's army was paralyzed by fear, but young David, the future king of Israel, stepped forward and defeated Goliath with nothing but a sling and a stone. This event was not just a personal victory for David, but symbolized Israel's ultimate victory over their long-time Philistine adversaries. In 1 Samuel 17:45-47, David declares to Goliath, "Thou comest to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied." David's victory over Goliath marked the beginning of a series of military successes for Israel over the Philistines. As Israel's king, David went on to subdue the Philistines, securing Israel's borders and establishing a united kingdom. Under his rule, Israel's sovereignty was strengthened, and the Philistine threat was significantly reduced. 1 Samuel 7:13 states, "So the Philistines were subdued, and they came no more into the coast of Israel." David's military victories, including his conquest of Philistine cities, were instrumental in solidifying Israel's claim to the land promised to them. The Bible not only recounts the historical tensions between Israel and surrounding nations, but also offers prophetic insights into the future role of Israel's neighbors, including the Palestinians. Though the term Palestinians, as we understand it today, did not exist in biblical times, the people who live in the region, historically known as Philistia, who would later be part of the broader Arab world, are often seen as the inheritors of ancient rivalries with Israel. The Bible's prophetic passages regarding Israel's neighbors provide critical insights into the long-standing enmity and foreshadow the ongoing territorial and political struggles. In the Old Testament, many of the prophets spoke of the land that Israel was to inhabit and the surrounding nations that would oppose them. These prophetic messages paint a picture of both judgment and future redemption, where Israel's enemies would one day be held accountable for their actions. In Ezekiel 36-5, God speaks of the land that he has promised to Israel, declaring, "Therefore thus saith the Lord God, surely in the fire of my jealousy have I spoken against the residue of the heathen, and against all Idumea, which have appointed my land into their possession with the joy of all their heart, with despiteful minds to cast it out for a prey." This passage speaks of the nations that have, at different times, occupied or laid claim to Israel's land, including the Philistines, and reflects the spiritual battle over the promised land. While it is not directly speaking of the Palestinians of today, the broader prophetic message highlights the ongoing struggle for the land that has been central to the conflict between Israel and its neighbors. The people living in the region, whether identified as Philistines in ancient times or Palestinians in the modern era, have historically had competing claims to the same land. Prophetic passages also reflect God's judgment on the surrounding nations. including the Philistines, and their treatment of Israel. In Zechariah 12:2-3, God declares, "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it." This passage speaks to the future, where Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, becomes a focal point for global tension and conflict. This prophecy aligns with the ongoing struggles over Jerusalem, a city claimed by both Israelis and Palestinians, and the intense competition for control over this sacred and strategic location. However, the Philistine threat did not disappear entirely. Even with David's victories, after David's death, the Philistines were still a constant source of tension and conflict. During the reign of Solomon, Israel experienced a period of peace, but the long-standing enmity between the Israelites and the Philistines remained, lurking beneath the surface. The Israelites, even in their times of peace, could not fully escape the legacy of these battles, as the Philistines continued to threaten Israel's borders and challenge their territorial claims. The Philistines' role as Israel's antagonists extends beyond the military confrontations described in the Bible. Their presence in the military confrontations described in the Bible, promised land, along with other neighboring nations such as the Moabites and Ammonites, formed the context for much of Israel's struggles. The Bible speaks of the Philistines as both a physical and spiritual adversary, representing the forces that opposed God's people and their mission to inhabit the land promised to them. In 1 Samuel 9:16, God tells Samuel that he will send thee a man out of the land of Benjamin, and thou shalt anoint him to be captain over my people Israel, that he may save my people out of the hand of the Philistines. This highlights how Israel's relationship with the Philistines was not just a military challenge, but also a divine struggle for Israel to fulfill its calling as God's chosen people in the land he had promised them. The Philistine rivalry with Israel, while fading over time, laid the groundwork for the later territorial conflicts in the region. The ongoing struggles for control over the land, the defense of borders, and the desire to dominate the region continued long after the fall of the Philistine power. In many ways, the conflict between Israel and the Philistines foreshadowed the modern-day territorial disputes that still rage today between Israel and its neighbors, particularly Palestinians, many of whom trace their lineage back to these ancient adversaries. The prophet Joel also speaks of God's judgment on those who divide the land of Israel. In Joel 3:2, God says, "I will also gather all nations, and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and parted my land." This passage points to a time when God will address the injustice of nations, dividing the land he gave to Israel, a theme that resonates deeply with the modern Israel-Palestine conflict, where international politics have shaped the fate of the land, while many of the prophecies about Israel's future emphasize the land's importance to God and Israel's ultimate restoration. They also serve as a reminder that God is aware of the actions of other nations and peoples in the region. The Palestinians, like the Philistines before them, have historically been part of the broader narrative of God's plan for the land of Israel. The Bible reflects both the spiritual and territorial conflict over this land, where those who oppose Israel's right to it are often seen as in opposition to God's divine purpose. Yet, the Bible also offers hope for peace and eventual reconciliation. In the book of Isaiah, we find prophecies about a future time when peace will come to the region. Isaiah 2:2-4 says, And it shall come to pass in the last days, that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. And many people shall go and say, Come thee, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. And he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. This vision of peace among nations, where God's kingdom is established, serves as a reminder that the ultimate resolution to the conflict between Israel and its neighbors, including the Palestinians, is found in God's divine plan for the world. While the conflict between Israel and Palestine is deeply rooted in history, the Bible reveals that this struggle is not without hope. The prophetic promises of restoration for Israel and the eventual peace that will come to Jerusalem reflect a future where all nations, including those who have historically been adversaries, will be reconciled under God's rule. The ongoing Israel-Palestine conflict, therefore, is not just a political or territorial issue. It is also a deeply spiritual matter, one that is ultimately part of God's greater plan for peace and redemption in the world. The modern-day conflict between Israel and the Palestinians is not a new struggle, but rather the continuation of ancient rivalries and territorial disputes that have persisted for thousands of years. While the political and historical context has evolved significantly, the root of the conflict can be traced back to the biblical struggles over the land of Canaan. This struggle was initially marked by the rivalry between Isaac and Ishmael, whose descendants, the Israelites, and the Arabs have fought over this land ever since. In the 20th century, the geopolitical shifts in the Middle East, particularly after World War I, laid the groundwork for the modern Israel-Palestine conflict. Following the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the division of its territories, the British Empire took control of Palestine under the British Mandate. The promises made to both Jews and Arabs during this period added to the complexity of the situation. The Balfour Declaration of 1917 supported the establishment of a Jewish national home in Palestine, while also recognizing the rights of the non-Jewish communities living there. However, the local Arab population, including Palestinians, saw this as a threat to their own national aspirations. As Jewish immigration to Palestine increased, tensions between the Jewish and Arab populations escalated, eventually leading to violent clashes. The establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, after the United Nations approved a partition plan dividing Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states, marked the beginning of open conflict. The Arab states, including Egypt, Jordan, and Iraq, rejected the plan and launched an attack against the newly declared State of Israel. This resulted in the First Arab-Israeli War, which Israel won, but at a high cost. As a result of the war, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced, and the issue of Palestinian refugees became a central point of contention. The 1948 war and its aftermath are seen by many as the birth of the modern Israel-Palestine conflict. The Palestinians, who were displaced from their homes and became refugees, viewed the establishment of Israel as a catastrophe, a sentiment that was later coined as the Nakba or catastrophe. The refugees and their descendants continue to demand the right to return to their ancestral lands, a demand that has remained a central issue in peace negotiations between Israel and Palestine. The conflict continued to intensify in the decades that followed, particularly after the 1967 Six-Day War, when Israel captured the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, territories that are still at the heart of the dispute today. In the aftermath of the war, Israel's occupation of these territories, which were previously controlled by Jordan and Egypt, led to further resentment among Palestinians and the Arab world. The question of sovereignty over Jerusalem, with both Israelis and Palestinians claiming it as their capital, remains one of the most contentious issues in the conflict. Throughout this period, the rivalry between Israel and Palestine has been shaped by the long history of territorial disputes. While the political landscape has changed, the fundamental issue of who has the right to the land remains unchanged. The Bible's prophecies about Israel's claim to the land, as well as the ongoing conflict with their neighbors, offer a powerful lens through which to understand the deep-rooted tensions. The modern conflict is, in many ways, the inheritance of these ancient rivalries, with the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael still vying for control over the same land promised to Abraham. Moreover, the ancient biblical stories of struggle and conflict are echoed in the present-day dynamics of the Israel-Palestine issue. Just as Israel faced external pressures from neighboring nations, so too does modern Israel find itself surrounded by nations, including Palestinians, who continue to challenge its existence. The sense of historical grievance, rooted in centuries of territorial disputes, fuels much of the animosity between the two peoples. While the modern conflict is undoubtedly shaped by political and historical factors, it is important to recognize the role that ancient biblical rivalries continue to play. Israel's claim to the land is intertwined with its religious and historical identity, just as Palestinians' connection to the land is tied to their sense of heritage and the pain of displacement. The Bible's account of the ancient struggles for the Promised Land, the enduring conflict between Isaac and Ishmael, and the eventual restoration of Israel all provide a theological and historical framework for understanding the ongoing dispute in the region. The modern conflict between Israel and Palestine, though influenced by contemporary politics, is ultimately a continuation of ancient enmities and territorial claims that stretch back to the time of Abraham's sons. The Bible's historical narrative of these struggles offers a unique perspective on the enduring nature of the conflict and the deep roots of rivalry between these two peoples. Jerusalem has long been a focal point of conflict, both in ancient and modern times, and it plays a pivotal role in the Bible's prophetic narrative regarding Israel and its neighbors, including the Palestinians. The city is not only significant because it is the heart of Israel's territorial and religious identity, but also because of its deep spiritual and prophetic significance. From the time of King David to the present-day struggle over Jerusalem's status, the city's role in the conflict has been shaped by a history of rivalries, divine promises, and prophetic declarations. The importance of Jerusalem in the Bible begins with King David, who conquered the city and established it as the capital of Israel around 1000 BC in 2 Samuel 5-6-10. We read of David's conquest of Jerusalem, which had been held by the Jebusites, marking a pivotal moment in Israel's history. David's capture of the city and his decision to make it the political and spiritual center of Israel laid the foundation for its centrality in God's plan. Jerusalem became the place where God's temple would eventually be, built under Solomon's reign, and it was here that Israel's identity as God's chosen people would be affirmed. The city of Jerusalem is repeatedly mentioned in the Bible, not only as a geographical location, but as a symbol of God's covenant with his people. In 2 Samuel 7:16, God promises David that his dynasty will endure, and that thine house and thy kingdom shall be established forever before thee. This promise is fulfilled through the establishment of Jerusalem as the capital and the place where God's presence dwelled, first in the tabernacle and later in the temple. This connection between Jerusalem and the eternal covenant is a central theme in the Bible, and the cities role in God's plan for Israel continues to be emphasized in the prophetic books. The rivalry over Jerusalem between Israel and its neighbors, including the Palestinians, is deeply rooted in the city's religious and spiritual significance. For the Israelites, Jerusalem is the site of the Holy Temple, the symbol of God's presence with his people. For the Palestinians, especially those who follow Islam, Jerusalem holds immense significance as the location of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam. This overlap of religious significance has made the city a focal point of contention between Israelis and Palestinians, both of whom view Jerusalem as a symbol of their right to the land and a key element in their identity. Biblical prophecy also plays a crucial role in understanding the ongoing tensions over Jerusalem. In Zechariah 12, 2-3, the prophet writes, "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege, both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it." This prophecy points to a time in the future when Jerusalem will be a center of global conflict, a burdensome stone that will provoke the nations of the world to gather against it. This imagery has been mirrored in modern times, where Jerusalem remains a source of tension, not just between Israel and Palestine, but also between Israel and the broader Arab world, as well as the international community. The idea of Jerusalem as a point of contention in the last days is also echoed in other prophetic passages. In Isaiah 2:2-4, we see a vision of peace where all nations will eventually come to Jerusalem to worship God. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. This passage envisions a time when Jerusalem will be the center of global peace and reconciliation, where all peoples will come to learn from God. However, the path to this peaceful future is marked by struggles, as the city continues to be a flashpoint for conflict, particularly between Israel and Palestine. The prophetic narrative in the Bible not only foretells the conflict over Jerusalem, but also offers hope for its eventual restoration. In Revelation 21:1-4, the vision of a new heaven and new earth culminates in the arrival of the New Jerusalem, the city of God, where his people will dwell in peace forever. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, "Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God." This promise speaks to the ultimate reconciliation and the establishment of God's eternal kingdom, with Jerusalem as its center. It is a vision of a future where peace reigns and the divisions that have plagued the city for centuries are healed. In this way, Jerusalem holds a dual role in the Bible, both as a source of conflict and a symbol of hope. The ancient rivalry between Israel and the surrounding nations, including Palestinians, over the city is deeply ingrained in the Scriptures. Yet the Bible also points to a time when this conflict will cease, and Jerusalem will become the city of peace for all nations. Until that time comes, the struggle over Jerusalem remains a poignant reminder of the long-standing enmity between Israel and its neighbors, a conflict that finds its roots in ancient biblical history and continues to shape the modern world. The ancient enmity between the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael laid the groundwork for the modern Israel-Palestine conflict. As we've seen, the rivalry between these two peoples can be traced back to the time of Abraham, but the modern struggle over the land has evolved with the political, social, and religious changes that have taken place in the 20th and 21st centuries. The events that unfolded in the early 1900s, particularly the British Mandate over Palestine, the Zionist movement, and the displacement of Palestinians, have all contributed to the ongoing tensions and the complex dynamics of this modern conflict. The Balfour Declaration of 1917 was a pivotal moment, marking the beginning of increased Jewish immigration to Palestine, which was then under British control. The declaration expressed British support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. For many Jews, this was seen as a fulfillment of their biblical promise, the return to the land of their ancestors. However, the local Arab population, including Palestinians, saw this as a direct threat to their own national aspirations, as they had been living in the region for centuries. The arrival of more Jews led to tensions between the Jewish and Arab communities, which only worsened as the 20th century progressed. The situation reached a breaking point in 1947, when the United Nations voted to partition Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. The plan was accepted by the Jewish leadership, but it was rejected by the Arab states and Palestinian leaders, who felt that it unfairly favored the Jewish population and denied Palestinians their right to self-determination. This division laid the foundation for the subsequent wars and struggles over land, identity, and sovereignty. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War, triggered by the declaration of the State of Israel, resulted in Israel's victory, but also led to the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs, many of whom became refugees in neighboring countries. The displacement of Palestinians and the ongoing refugee crisis remain central issues in the conflict. The Palestinians refer to this event as the Nakba, meaning catastrophe, as they view the creation of Israel and the resulting refugee crisis as an injustice that continues to affect their people to this day. Over the decades, the issue of Palestinian refugees, those who were displaced in 1948 and their descendants, has remained one of the most contentious aspects of the Israel-Palestine conflict. The right of return for Palestinian refugees, or compensation for their loss, remains a deeply emotional and divisive issue. The 1967 Six-Day War further reshaped the territorial boundaries in the region and added to the complexities of the Israel-Palestine conflict. During this war, Israel captured the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, territories that were previously controlled by Jordan and Egypt. The Israeli occupation of these territories has been a significant source of tension between Israelis and Palestinians ever since. Palestinians in these areas view Israeli settlements, military presence, and control over key resources as an infringement on their sovereignty and their right to self-determination. Israel, on the other hand, views the security of these territories as crucial to its defense and insists that Jerusalem remains its undivided capital. The issue of Jerusalem is perhaps the most prominent and emotionally charged aspect of the conflict. For both Israelis and Palestinians, the city is central to their religious, cultural, and historical identities. Israel considers Jerusalem its eternal capital, while Palestinians claim East Jerusalem as the capital of a future Palestinian state. The division of Jerusalem and the status of its holy sites continue to be a source of intense conflict. The international community remains divided over the issue, with some countries recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, while others, including many Arab nations, support the Palestinian claim to East Jerusalem. The conflict between Israel and Palestine has persisted for decades, with numerous attempts at peace and resolution. The Oslo Accords in the 1990s, brought hope for a two-state solution, with both sides agreeing to negotiate the creation of an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel. However, progress has been slow, and many of the key issues, such as the status of Jerusalem, the return of refugees, and the borders of a Palestinian state, remain unresolved. Both sides have experienced violence, trauma, and loss, and the conflict continues to define the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians today. Despite the political complexities, the Israel-Palestine conflict is not just about territorial disputes. It is also deeply rooted in religious and cultural identity. The descendants of Isaac and Ishmael, who once fought for control over the Promised Land, continue to struggle for their rightful place in the land of their ancestors. Both sides draw on their historical and religious narratives to justify their claims, and the ancient rivalry between the two peoples is still evident in the present-day conflict. The ongoing struggle over the land, particularly Jerusalem, remains a microcosm of the broader conflict between Israel and Palestine. It is a struggle that echoes the ancient battles and rivalries, where the promises made to Abraham's descendants have been fiercely contested over centuries. While the political situation may have evolved, the deep-rooted spiritual and territorial claims to the land continue to shape the conflict and fuel the enmity between the two peoples. The Israel-Palestine conflict, while deeply entrenched in modern politics and territorial disputes, also holds profound significance within the context of biblical prophecy. Throughout the Scriptures, God promises a future for Israel, one that includes both their restoration and ultimate peace. Prophecy in the Bible offers both a window into the ongoing struggles faced by Israel and the hope of resolution through divine intervention. While the conflict remains unresolved in human terms, the Bible provides insight into the future role of Israel, the surrounding nations, and the ultimate reconciliation that will occur in God's time. One of the most significant prophetic promises regarding Israel's future is found in the book of Ezekiel. In Ezekiel 36:24-28, God promises to gather Israel from the nations where they have been scattered and restore them to their own land. He says, "For I will take you from among the heathen and gather you out of all countries, and will bring you into your own land. And I will put my spirit within you, and cause you to walk in my statutes. And ye shall keep my judgments, and do them." This prophecy of restoration speaks not only to Israel's physical return to the land, which began in the 20th century with the establishment of the State of Israel, but also to their spiritual revival and ultimate reconciliation with God. This return to the land, foretold in Ezekiel and other prophetic books, is not just about the land itself, but about Israel's future relationship with God. The prophetic books emphasize that Israel will one day turn back to God in faith, acknowledging Jesus as the Messiah. In Zechariah 12:10, it is written, "And I will pour upon the house of David, and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the spirit of grace and of supplications. And they shall look upon me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him, as one mourneth for his only son." This prophecy points to a time when Israel will recognize Jesus as the Messiah they once rejected, and their mourning will lead to repentance and spiritual renewal. The ultimate resolution of the Israel-Palestine conflict, according to the Bible, involves not just territorial peace, but a deep spiritual transformation. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul speaks about the future reconciliation of Israel with God in Romans 11:25-26. Paul writes, "For I would not, brethren, that ye should be ignorant of this mystery, that blindness in part is happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in, and so all Israel shall be saved." This passage reveals that while Israel is currently in a state of spiritual blindness. A time will come when Israel will be spiritually awakened, leading to the fulfillment of God's promise of salvation. This will be a key moment in the resolution of the Israel-Palestine conflict, as it will bring about peace not just between the two peoples, but also between Israel and God. The Israel-Palestine conflict is one of the most persistent and complex struggles in modern history, but its roots stretch far back into the ancient pages of the Bible, from the time of Abraham, when the promise of the land was made to his descendants, to the long-standing rivalry between Isaac and Ishmael. The conflict has been embedded in the history and identity of these two peoples. The struggle over the land of Canaan, which was promised to Israel, has been a central issue for thousands of years. And the Bible gives us both a historical and prophetic lens through which to understand the ongoing tensions. As we've explored, the biblical narrative shows that the rivalry between Israel and its neighbors, particularly the Palestinians, descendants of Ishmael, began long before the birth of the modern nation of Israel. The ancient struggles between Israel and the Philistines, the constant battles for control over the promised land, and the prophetic words that spoke of territorial disputes all lay the groundwork for the modern conflict. Israel's claim to the land, tied to the promises made to Abraham, continues to collide with the Palestinian claim to the same territory, a land that has been home to both peoples for centuries. However, the Bible also offers a vision of hope for the future, pointing to a time when these ancient rivalries will be resolved, not through human efforts or political negotiations, but through God's intervention. The prophecies regarding the restoration of Israel and the ultimate peace that will come to Jerusalem are not just symbolic. They are promises that reflect the future reconciliation between God and his people, Israel, and the eventual peace among nations. The Bible envisions a time when Jerusalem will no longer be a battleground, but a place of unity and worship, where all nations will come together in peace under God's rule. The modern Israel-Palestine conflict, though deeply rooted in history, is also a reminder of the larger spiritual conflict over the land and the people. The Bible teaches that the ultimate resolution to this conflict is tied to Israel's spiritual awakening and recognition of Jesus as the Messiah. In that day, Israel will be restored to its rightful place, and the nations will come to peace. The rivalry between Israel and Palestine, while tragic and unresolved in human terms, is part of God's greater redemptive plan for the world, which will culminate in the establishment of his kingdom. While the path to peace remains elusive, the Bible assures us that God is in control of history. The tensions over Jerusalem, the land, and the identity of the people are not final, as they are part of a divine narrative that will ultimately bring peace. As the prophets foretold, a time is coming when the lion shall lie down with the lamb. Isaiah 11:6, and the divisions that have plagued the land will give way to the peace of God that surpasses all understanding. In conclusion, the Israel-Palestine conflict is more than just a political struggle. It is a deeply spiritual matter with ancient roots and prophetic significance. The Bible offers both a historical perspective on the origins of this conflict and a hopeful vision for its resolution. As we look to the future, we can trust that God's promises for Israel and for all nations will be fulfilled, and that the ultimate peace will come when God's kingdom is established on earth. Until that time, the Israel-Palestine conflict remains a poignant reminder of the importance of the land, the people, and the divine promises that continue to shape the history of this region.